Hello, everybody, and welcome to the HTML All the Things podcast, episode number 19, Front-End Developer Roadmap. I'm your host, Matt Lawrence, and I'm joined again by my co-host, Mike Karan. What have you been up to this week, Mike?
Yeah, hey, Matt. So this week has been, again, tons of work on the Hat website, so hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at that if you're listening to this episode a little bit later. We put a lot of work into that, and it should be, an evolving project as we go. So there's definitely going to be some changes, but it's definitely going to be pretty cool to see it up and live for people to actually use. But we'll have a whole segment on that, so I'm not going to get too far into it. Other than that, I was just traveling actually in the United States, just going to see my younger cousin play some NCAA hockey. Did some work while I was traveling. Always kind of like working in hotels sometimes, change of scenery, stuff like that. So, that was my week. What about you, Matt?
I guess this is the time for a disclaimer. This is a pre-recorded episode. We realized, and this basically sums up our very, very busy week, is we realized about halfway through the week that I'm on vacation for a week and a half, and we pre-recorded the last episode, as we said. But then we realized, I'm leaving on the day of the episode. So there's 2 episodes that I'd be missing because I'm away for the week and a half. So we rushed this one out. So this is also a pre-recorded episode. So like Mike said, we've been working hard on the HTML All the Things website. So it may be in a different status than what you see, what we're going to be talking about. So maybe you should go and check out the actual website. So that was a big part. And then I was also tying up a whole bunch of loose ends this week. Notifying customers that we work with repeatedly and constantly that I am leaving for a week. And so that, that's a standard business practice, but very important that you kind of let your customers know, hey, I'm leaving, send me, I'm going to be doing all these updates on this day. So let me, send everything by that day and then I'll get to it kind of thing. So that's today, actually, the day that we're recording this, tying up all the loose ends, including recording this podcast. So very busy last, I'm going to say probably 3 weeks for both of us. So yeah, it's been a pretty crazy experience. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the show because this show is also a little bit different. So normally we have a bunch of segments, and we do have 3 segments plus web news, but the main segment is going to be a little bit different. So we'll be covering a document that Mike found on GitHub called the Front-End Developer Roadmap, and it covers a learning roadmap of skills and tools, as well as more. So just literally a roadmap, you don't know anything and you just want to jump right in. It goes right from the very beginning throughout the continue learning or keep exploring part of one's career where you're okay, I've learned one of each thing. I'm just going to keep getting better and honing my skill. So there is quite a bit of information on the document, and we'll be hitting the main points only, and we'll be paraphrasing here and there, adding our own opinions throughout. And not covering everything, because I said there's quite a bit of information in there. So make sure that you actually check out the show notes where the link to the actual article is there. The person that actually is that runs the GitHub page is Kamran Ahmed. So just a bit of a shout out to him because Mike found this, and it's quite an interesting document. And he has more documents for more than just front end as well. So maybe something we'll cover in future episodes. So segment number 1 is going to be our roadmap discussion, as I just went on about. Segment number 2 is going to be an update on the HTML All the Things website. And then segment number 3 is going to be web news. And this was actually a web news that was suggested to us on Instagram via DM. And it's Microsoft Office versus Google Docs. And it's talking about those 2 Office suites. So that one should be an interesting and probably a heated conversation, I'm sure, as we always do Microsoft versus Google here. But let's jump right in, I think, to the roadmap discussion, because there are quite a bit of points. I think there's around 18 or 20 points here. So I'm going to kind of start right here, start at the beginning. So for the listener, just a real brief mention of what this document is. So right at the top of the document, it's learn the basics, and it's kind of like a timeline of sorts where you kind of go through, and there's main numbered points with a whole bunch of notes here and there of what you should be doing, and quick facts and that type of thing, like a whole bunch of little things you should know. So as you progress down the document, you get to the keep exploring page, and that's, like I said, that's okay, I've learned one of everything, and I should just kind of keep honing my skill and learning more, but I've learned mostly everything in specifically the quote unquote front end part of this industry. So segment or point number 1, 2, and 3 are the basics. So learn HTML, learn the basics of CSS, learn the basics of JavaScript, and with that comes things like, learn how to use Flexbox and Grid, do media queries and responsive websites. That's part of your CSS. Learn the basics of how to write semantic HTML, dividing the page into sections and how to structure the DOM properly, make at least 5 HTML pages, focus on structure, and don't worry about making them pretty yet. And then you'll use those CSS skills that I just mentioned to make it pretty. And then, of course, the basics of JavaScript. So learn the syntax and basic constructs and learn how to manipulate the DOM, understand the concepts such as hoisting, event bubbling, prototype, etc. Learn Fetch API, learn ES6+, new features, and writing modular JavaScript. So he has them listed in order of learn HTML, basics of JavaScript, basics of CSS, and then basics of JavaScript. But for us, our experience was it was kind of a meld. It was kind of everything all at once. So our personal experience, we kind of jumped into the goal of number 4, which is make some responsive website and add some interactivity with JavaScript. So when Mike and I first started out, we basically said we want to make sure that all of our customers get responsive websites right out of the gate. We don't want any mobile site stuff, because I think we've mentioned in previous episodes when we first started, mobile websites, like the separate mobile website, was still like a rather popular thing. And there was so kind of people on the fence, right? Like, oh, just make a mobile website. Why would you make it responsive? So we said, no, we want one website. We want it to be right, just done, quote unquote correctly. We want to make sure that it's one design that moves around and make sure it fits on most screen sizes. So we jumped essentially right to number 4, and then we melded number 1, 2, and 3. So that's kind of why I mixed those ones up there, right? So it's like we just kind of learned each little bit. Now, this structure that's actually on the document is probably a really good structure for someone who's never programmed before, somebody who, because the HTML is sort of known as being, rather simple. CSS can be simple and gets complex, and then JavaScript, again, can take you from really simple to very complex. So learning them 1, 2, 3 is probably a good idea. But if you're already jumped in, this is why I mentioned this. If you've already jumped in and you're kind of, already all mixed around in those 3, in those 4, that's rather normal. I would say that was our experience. We just sort of dove into a project and was like, oh, we need to learn a little bit of HTML today. Oh, this CSS is, we need to learn how to make this heading bigger or what have you. Oh, this, I need to make this disappear sometimes. We need a little bit of JavaScript, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sort of our experience, and that's sort of the beginning of the roadmap, and probably the beginning of everyone's thing is, you probably are Googling how to make a website, and this is exactly the type of things that you'll be learning and the type of things that you'll be going through. Now, number 5 is something sort of an interesting one, and it's something we have never done. We've absolutely talked about it. We've absolutely looked into it, and we've had, I think, actually in-depth conversations a few years ago regarding this. So number 5 on this roadmap is search projects on GitHub and open a few PRs. Some of the ideas are listed below, so I'm just going to list out the ideas here. So enhance the UI, make any demo pages responsive or improve the design, look for any open issues that you can solve, refactor any of the code, or implement the best practices that you learned along the way. So that's actually something that we did a decent amount of research on. I remember jumping into Medium for the first time as a part of a writing project, seeing a bunch of developer pages, and I sort of jumped into a couple. And a few of the articles I was reading was typically guides, or just, commenting on the fact that people were contributing to open source projects and, contributing to these open, or these GitHub repos. That is something we've never formally done, and we have personally kind of moved it over. So we pushed that over, and we started making our own thing. So this is sort of at step 5, our journey was sort of, we started doing things like list by design, doing a few extensions here and there for Google Chrome. We did like a couple of Chrome apps. We started making sites for ourselves. So things like Free Photos Hamilton, those type of things. So we still kind of did quote unquote repos or like projects, but we just never contributed to other people. We just kind of dove right in and just started making them ourselves. And that's sort of kind of a general consensus of how we do things, I think. And, I don't think it's unique to us, but some people maybe wouldn't want to learn it this way. But like I said, with number 4, we just dove in and said we're making responsive websites. And then we melded points 1 through 4 there. With this one, it's like, oh, I could contribute to this guy's project, or I could just make my own. So Mike and I are kind of more the guys that will just kind of like have a goal, and we'll just kind of like dive right in and try to hit it and try to get it done as fast or as not as, I shouldn't say as fast, but we'll try to like hit that goal. We won't try to like meander and go around, but there's absolutely no problem with contributing to other people's things. And to be honest, is something that we're still actively looking into and would be an interesting experience because we do not have that formal experience. So number six on the document is give yourself a pat on the back. You're getting there, and I'm just going to read this little point here as well. So there are many jobs out there requiring the skill set that you have gotten till this point. So that would be, just to recap, learn HTML, basics of CSS, basics of JavaScript, make some responsive website and add interactivity with JavaScript, and then the GitHub stuff that I just mentioned. And to continue my point there, you can easily start getting some freelance work or find yourself a job if you may. However, don't stop here. There's still a long way to go if you want to have a better career. And this is a really key point, I think, that is really important. So when Mike first sent this to me, I think it was yesterday or the day before, I looked at it and I was like, oh, Nelly, like there's a lot of stuff in here. And I'm sure that we've touched on all or most of it, but there's some stuff that I'm sure, especially like little intricate points where it's like, I've done it once or I have never needed it. So I've never touched it and I've never like gone after it, that type of thing. So like for me, it's like my journey and Mike's journey too, admittedly, and we'll be getting into this later on, is that like we're still learning, we're still going, but we're doing this professionally, and we've been doing this professionally for a number of years now. So, and we're only on number 6 here, and like I said, there's 18 or 20 points in this, and you can, as it's been stated, rather, you can already get a job at this point. So I think it's really, really key to note that if you go and look at this document, it looks really like, oh, you know, like, oh my God, like what's going on here? But it is a gradual path. And each one of these points, each one of these skills, each one of these parts are very valuable as a skill that you can acquire. And it's absolutely a skill that you can sell. And you don't need to know absolutely everything to start making money, to get a job, especially like something like in a startup or in a junior web developer or developer position. You know, absolutely you don't need to know all 18 or all 20 points for this. You can just simply like, you know, get a bunch of skills, learn how to do a bunch of stuff, and then you could try and like sell those, essentially, quote unquote, sell those skills to employers or maybe to freelance clients, whichever you'd prefer. So I think the next one, I think Mike's going to take over for number 7 here.
Yeah, Matt. Sounds good. So I just wanted to add to the number 5 point where we didn't do any, where you mentioned that we didn't do any, like, you know, collaboration with GitHub and with other people. I think that was because we were kind of fortunate in being able to have projects to work on, for actually like paid projects to work on right away. So we weren't forced to kind of go in and try to find stuff to contribute to, find stuff to do without that. So because we had that income coming in, we could kind of, use that income, even though it was really small, to live, and then, you know, use the rest of our time to kind of expand our skills on our own. And I think that was one of the major reasons that we chose to do our own projects instead of contributing to other people's. I just wanted to mention that. I don't know, might be important for some people to know why we chose not to contribute. And like you said, there's definitely, I definitely plan on doing contributions at some point when I feel like it'd be, you know, when I feel like my skills would be usable for other people's projects. So
well,
I'm just gonna
one point there, actually, just based on your point, which I think is actually important. It's a good thing you brought this up, is that I think a lot of it had to do with our motivation. I think you and I are probably more motivated to work on a project that we are fully invested in. And I think that like, I mean, different motivations, you know, affect different people. Some people really want to contribute to the community. Some people are motivated to learn this entire document just because they have an idea that they don't want to hire a developer for and they want to learn it themselves. So I think that one's motivation is really one of those key points that would drive you through a document like this, through a career path like this. So it's just like that's an interesting point, or something that you brought up that's really important, is, you know, if you really don't, I don't want to use the word don't care, but like if you really don't care about contributing to someone else's repo, you absolutely don't necessarily have to. If you do, that's great. And like even we said, like we're willing to, and we're looking into doing it at some point. But for us, I think a motivator is like, let's start this. Let's kickstart this. Let's do this for us. And then we'll have a project done that we did. So just something to note there.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. So let's just move on to the next point. So number 7 is package managers. So we kind of went slowly into this. I think I think a lot of people would have went like head first, but we were a little bit resilient to use package managers. I'm not really sure why, but maybe it's just because we were so used to doing it the old-fashioned way of just downloading the package, putting a script tag in your HTML file, and that's it. But package managers are actually really useful, and we've definitely been using them very, very consistently, maybe over the past year or maybe two even, where especially with like a Node.js application, and especially when you start getting into stuff like Vue, stuff like that, package managers are hugely beneficial, and they will save you a ton of time. So what I mean by package managers is NPM, so the Node package managers. There's also another one which I haven't had much experience with. I think I've used it only once, and there's not much difference as far as I could see, but there's another one called Yarn. So whichever one you want to learn, I think it doesn't matter. You kind of just learn one. The other one is simple to use if you want. I'm not really sure what the differences are or the benefits or negatives of each. But yeah, pretty much like package managers allow you to kind of keep your packages up to date easier too, because you can have a package file where you put all the packages that you use in kind of like a JSON format, and inside that JSON format you can say like, I want to use this package and I want it to either stay at this exact version, or I want it to stay at download at least this minimum version of this package and then update it as you go. Each has their benefits and negatives. I think on a production application, when you have something that hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people are using, you want to find a version that works, stick to that version, put in just the version number that you're comfortable with, and then when you go and migrate to a new version, you want to do that on a demo server, test if everything works as planned, and then migrate that. So you want to keep it kind of static, the versioning, and on maybe like your personal project, it doesn't matter, because like you want to just see the newest versions of everything, and you want to make sure that you can adapt to a newer version of a package, so you can keep it more flexible. So it gives you that kind of opportunity, and you don't have to go in and go into the website, install the package, put it into a folder called library, and then you import, and then just like manually put the package into a script tag. You can with a package manager, as well as maybe a tool like Webpack, which we'll be talking about later, you can kind of get it all into one file and have it really simple of just typing in npm install. It'll look at your package.json file, and it'll install the correct packages for you, import them into the correct spots, and you're good to go. You'll just have to use some imports here and there wherever you use those packages. It's I think it's a very crucial tool to learn. I think it's smart that on this roadmap it's pretty early on, because I think it really builds upon, like, you build upon it as you go down the roadmap, and we'll be talking about it more, but it's cool that they put it so early. I would say with our experience, we definitely learned it a little bit later in the roadmap, so that's just how we approached it, but I would still recommend to follow this roadmap for this specific point. So the next one is install some external dependencies in your application. So actually use that package manager to get a package and then install it into your application with import, or again, you can do it the old-fashioned way of just putting it into a script tag and just referencing the the CSS of that package, or the HTML or the JS of that package. I'm sure you're familiar with how to import an actual external dependency. So stuff that we first did with external dependencies, I would say, is probably Owl Carousel. Matt can probably back me up on this one, but we were trying to find something that would do like a slider, or like an effective slider, and we kind of looked through all the packages out there, and we saw Owl Carousel, so we decided to use it, and it served us pretty well for a long time. Now, I'm not a huge fan of sliders anymore. When we first starting out, they were really popular. Now I would say that they're less popular, and probably for good reason. People, in my opinion, from what we've seen, is they don't stay on the page long enough to see multiple slides. So you're kind of wasting that real estate in the back there. You're wasting the performance. There's no point to have it. It's better to have it either lower in the page, or just kind of incorporate everything into one slide if you can, or one like cover photo if you can. I think it's a more concise and a better way to show information, instead of making the user either have to scroll through the slides, or have to wait if it's on a time thing for the next slide to show up. So that we use we use Awakare. So the other thing that we still use quite often is Lightbox, and this one is Lightbox by Lokesh Dakar, and I think it's a fairly popular library, a fairly popular external dependency. It's just a really simple, like very lightweight Lightbox, which is just pretty much something that will kind of allow you to make a photo gallery where you can click on a photo and it'll pop up kind of in a what's called a lightbox, right? And it won't take up the whole screen, but it'll take up a larger portion, and you can click through the rest of your gallery, or you can click around it to exit out of it, or you can click on the X to exit out of it and go back to your page. So that's what a lightbox is. We use that initially too. So these two, I'm just going to bring up like a couple of examples because there's hundreds and thousands and millions of libraries out there right now, but I'm just saying these are probably the first two that we used. Maybe Font Awesome would be one of them as well. That would be considered an external dependency. So it's definitely something we used a lot, and we still use sometimes. But yeah, so I think with where you're learning this, I think it's a good idea. I think we kind of incorporated it into our probably first three to learn the basics. So learn HTML, basics of CSS, and basics of JavaScript. I think we started using libraries right there. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but that's pretty much where we immediately went like, oh, we don't want to build our own slider, so why don't we look for something that exists, and we kind of imported it in the static way and used it right away. I wouldn't say we followed this completely with stuff like that. We didn't use a lot of packages. Where as you probably know, we're very into the vanilla coding. If we don't need a package, we definitely would prefer to code it ourselves, especially if we're only going to use one little portion of a package. I like to kind of spend a little bit of time and code it myself to make it more like performance, a better performance for the user, instead of having to import a massive package just to use one little feature from it. But other than that, we did use some packages when we were starting out in a little bit of a different order in this roadmap. But it's definitely a good idea to learn package managers and then actually install those packages using the package managers. Kind of hit two birds with one stone, and you don't have to go in and mess around with the actual folders and stuff like that. But that's about it for point 7 and 8. I'm going to pass it off to Matt to have any comments and to talk about the next few points as well.
Yeah, so one thing I just wanted to comment, and this is more of a personal thing, maybe, but it might help some of you, is one of the things when I was learning NPM was that I kind of got like scared because it was like Node.js and I didn't know what that was. This is like maybe a couple years ago now, and I was like, oh man, I don't know about these packages. Like I don't know what they are. Like I didn't really understand what was going on, and what I equate it to, and what really helps me sort of think it, and I think it through like this now even today, is I don't know, and this requires a very specific piece of experience, like work experience, so this is why I said it might be a personal story more than anything, but I equate it to installing applications and various like plugins or whatever you're doing on a Linux machine on the command line. So like apt-get or something like that, I equate like NPM is basically doing that if you think about it, because you can actually install things like, you could install, and I'm about to talk about this in a minute, but you can install packages like Sass, which is a CSS preprocessor. You could install that what's called globally, where you can then use like compiling with Sass anywhere in your command line. So I don't want to get like too technical to like, because that's kind of really zooming in at that point, and we're kind of going at a broad angle here. But just something to keep in mind is just like how you're grabbing packages and install files via command line with, like as you would in a Linux terminal or in a Linux bash command, that's basically what you're doing with NPM, and you can install it kind of per project or globally, is how I've experienced it. So just something to keep in mind if you have any like administration experience. That's kind of how I figured it out in my head with that previous work experience. But moving on to point number 9 here, CSS preprocessors. Like I've already mentioned, there's a couple of examples: Sass, PostCSS, Less, Stylus. And I'm just going to read the blurb here. So preprocessors let you add functionality on top of CSS and let you do things that CSS can't. have a look at any of them and see what they have to offer and pick the suitable one. So he has a note here that says learn Sass for now, and I'm not going to read the whole point there, but out of those ones, I've more or less heard of Sass, Post, and Less. Stylus, like, it's kind of like I've heard it in passing, but like I couldn't, like, if someone said, is Stylus a CSS thing? I'd been like, I don't know. But those other three, absolutely. I've heard of those, and I've used Sass the most extensively. I think I used Less once, but I've used Sass more extensively, and the biggest feature I can think of is, I think they call them mix-ins. I always forget terminology with these type of things for some reason, but I believe they call them mix-ins. But if you think about it, it's like what he said, they add functionality on top of CSS that like basically allow you to do things that CSS can't. A really big one is variables. So that's kind of how I explain it to people if they ask. So it would be something like, if you have a background color that's always standard across a site, that's just red because that's the company's color and they always want that as the background of every page. You can't in CSS just assign something to red. Like, you could assign it to class, like you could assign that hex code, like whatever shade of red it is, you could assign that hex code to a class, but like that's starting to get messy, and then you're calling red and you don't know whether you're calling the color or the background color or what you're doing. So you can have just a straight up variable. So you could, constantly say in the various pages like background color, and then actually have a variable there rather than constantly pasting the hex code. So that way you just have like, you can have like, various variables like secondary color, primary color, background color, text color, etc. And then just use that throughout your CSS. Now that can be added into a bunch of other CSS pieces and complexities that I'm about to get into. But that's sort of the main thing that I think of when I think of Sass is, I can now do variables. And of course it's more powerful than that. Absolutely. That's something for another day because that's a whole conversation on its own. But something that is really interesting, and I'm sure that as you advance, if you're starting from the basics, from the very beginning, something that you'll be like, man, I just wish I could get, like, I don't want to type this hex code anymore. I don't want to remember it. I don't want to copy it over anymore. I don't want to copy paste it. This is sort of where you're starting to get at, and you're like starting to need a CSS preprocessor. So that'll move us to point number 10, which is a CSS framework. And main examples here are Bootstrap, Materialize CSS, and Bulma. Of course, we've talked about and used Bootstrap on the show and in one of our templates that we have up for offer now. We have used Materialize, actually. We've used Materialize before we started using Bootstrap. That was a number of years ago. We haven't used it since because we were interested in the Google material design system. So CSS Framework, and he even says here, so I'm just going to read the point that's within the roadmap. So you really don't need to learn any, but still they're good to have. So exactly what he said there, it is absolutely something that, like, some people, when I mention, I've used Bootstrap or I've used this, they like, what the heck are you doing? And other people are like, I use Materialize all the time, or I use Bootstrap for, my forms or whatever. Absolutely, this is sort of a more optional step, but what I kind of found it kind of helped me get into the mindset, I guess, of more advanced CSS. I started using Bootstrap, and then Bootstrap was like, well, if you want to edit this, you have to use Sass. And that's what led me to Sass. And then I was like, you can theme Bootstrap. This is how themes are made. And I think this was like a year or so ago. This is how themes are made. And this is how people take Bootstrap, change all the default colors. Because if you use Bootstrap in its most basic form, most sites are going to look, generally the same. So it's like, these guys on like Theme Forest or other marketplaces, this is how their thing is still their template is still a Bootstrap template, but it looks totally different than the default Bootstrap. It's because they're theming the Bootstrap and they're using things like Sass and whatever other tools these guys are using. But for me personally, that's what got me into this sort of more, because as you can tell, it's starting to get more advanced CSS, more advanced UI development. And so it might be something that you're interested in. And I was installing Sass with NPM. So like all this stuff starts to meld together, and you don't necessarily have to do it in this order, but it's starting to really kind of meld together, and it comes together. So the reason why I mentioned that is because this is going to sound really overwhelming. It's like, Jesus, I got to learn HTML, CSS, JS. I got to learn how to package this stuff. No. It's not going to be all at once like that in any means. It's not like school where every day is a different math lesson. If you don't get it, you're screwed. It's not like that at all. It's literally like you advance in CSS, like literally advance your skill in CSS. Then you're going to be like, man, I really want to just quickly do some of this stuff. So you're going to start using packages like Mike said, like owl, carousel, and whatever for sliders. Then you're going to be like, man, I really want more advanced features in CSS. You're going to start using preprocessors, and then you're going to be like, you're also going to be like, man, I need to bang out this website for a client really quick. And then you're going to immediately go to something like Bootstrap or Materialize to quickly get a site spun up. So it's very important that you realize that this is not as serious as one might think. It is quite literally it's a natural progression through this. This is just sort of a guide because there's a lot of advice out there all over the place. And this is just sort of a nice little, like I said, roadmap for this. And then number 11 here is CSS architecture. So I'm just going to read the blurb here like I did before. There are multiple ways to structure your CSS better and to make it more maintainable. You should know about the differences. And then personally, I myself use BEM more, and that's the author of this document writing that. So some of the suggested ones here are BEM, OOCSS, SMACSS, Suit CSS, and then Atomic. So full disclosure, I've never used these before. I've heard of Atomic, and that's it out of all three of these. Slight bit of research that Mike and I did before the show. We looked at BEM and Atomic, and from what we gather, and again, I have not used this, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, please, but basically it's like a method of doing CSS. So it's them, naming classes a certain way, assigning properties to these classes a certain way. It's like a mentality that you get. And what Mike and I were discussing, and the main value we thought of right away, is the consistency. So for an example, one of the first things we announced on HTML All the Things, which kind of fell by the wayside at this point, is the Roma museum template. And what I was telling Mike is, what if we, for example, said, okay, we're going to make Roma for HTML All the Things and offer it as a theme, but we also have a client that's a museum, that has a museum and needs a site. So what we'll do is we'll make the template as a generic template, but Mike, you need to do the client part of it. You need to do the client work. So as I'm working and as I'm finishing parts, you can take those and adapt them for the client. Well, it's going to be really difficult for Mike and I to work on that same UI together if there is no standard. So this CSS architecture is, quote unquote, a better way to actually write it, and it organizes it and everything. But that was one of the main things that we thought of, was working in a team. Now your class names are consistent. People know what's going on. It's once you're in there, you know what I mean? Like it's not so crazy as, I'll just give an example. If I write navbar and somebody else writes topbar as like the two classes, none of those are incorrect. But if Mike comes in, he'll be like, well, this is top bar, this one's navbar. I think they're both at the top, but which one's the navigation? But they both are. So you know what I mean? There's no consistency with CSS because you make your own classes. But with this, there's more of a consistent system where you can take a look and be like, oh, this is a button and its state is this. This is a button and its state is to approve, etc., etc., etc. So that's kind of what I'm getting into. And I know I'm talking kind of at a high level, and this is like a more complex topic. So if you don't understand this, just take a look at these tools yourself and it will make more sense. It's kind of hard to explain, especially in summary. But I think what I'll do now is pass it on to Mike for these last few points here.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So the next point is build tools, and that's number 12. Now, we talked about this a little bit with the whole NPM. So what NPM has is NPM scripts. So, and scripts, like I said in that config file, you can actually put scripts into there, like saying, let's start this application, let's package it this way, and then let's put a debug tag on it so that the application knows that it's in debug mode and gives me some console logs and all that stuff. So you can use things called, like I said, npm scripts to do stuff like that. You can also use something called Webpack, which will take your application and kind of package it so that you don't have to actually write just general HTML, JS, and CSS code, just like you would. You can actually write separate files for each and every one of your sections, and then use imports right in your JS code. And with those imports, it's telling stuff like Webpack to take those to take like a library if you're importing a library, or to take like a JSON file if you're importing a JSON file, and upon compiling, actually put that file into that spot that you're importing. So it's a package manager. It's a way to package an application that's maybe a little bit more complicated, that has a lot of moving pieces. So you can work on different pieces simultaneously if you have a larger team. It's a way to do kind of like have a development server going on in the background as well, that's constantly compiling on save with reloading. There's many different things that Webpack does, and I'm only going to scratch the very, very surface of it. Definitely look into it when you have a chance, because for myself, I'm actually not that versed with Webpack yet. I have started using it. Like the new Hat HTML Things website is definitely based and packaged with Webpack. Vue.js in general, I'm pretty sure uses Webpack right off the bat. Just when you start it up, it uses Webpack to do all the compiling. So I definitely have a little bit of information about Webpack, but I'm not versed enough in it to kind of, teach it at this point. But I will be looking into it more heavily in the future, because I see its value at this point right now, being able to use those imports, being able to kind of build those very modular applications with Webpack. It just makes sense kind of to use at the stage that I'm at. And this kind of brings it to the point where it's like we're at point 12 now, so we're, fairly far down, just a little over halfway to the very bottom. And these are really the main and more complicated topics that we're starting to cover. So once you get to these topics, it's almost kind of inherent that you understand the rest of them as well. Even the ones down below, you kind of start getting a sense of them. And it's really interesting. Like the learning process in web development is almost like learning like any sort of language. If you've ever learned like German, French, or anything like that, you kind of, at first you're very much scrambling on how, to say hello and how to say goodbye. But as soon as you start getting a few steps into it, you start like watching shows to understand, dialogue and stuff like that. You start understanding it, and you start understanding it forward a little bit too, because you start understanding what you're missing, what you still need to learn. Where at the start you're so overwhelmed, or you're so like basic, that these first few steps seem so complicated, and you don't really know where to start, where to go. But so what I'm trying to say is that this is the point in the learning process that I found that I'm starting to see forward. I'm starting to see those like other opportunities, those other frameworks, those other technologies that could help me, could benefit me, and how I could use them. Like I don't know exactly how to use some of these things, but I definitely understand its point, and I can definitely go into it and be like, well, I know I need to use it here now, like Google how to use it. And Webpack is a really good thing because it kind of brings all that together, because you need Webpack to be able to use many different technologies at once, due to the fact that it provides that importing and it provides that packaging solution. So the other thing here is linting. So the main lint is called ESLint, and what linting does is it allows you to say you have a format of JS code that you like to write that has like one of the things could be like, I don't like tabs, I like spaces. So make sure that everything is like 2 spaces instead of 1 tab. I like to use I don't like anything to have a var, because vars are bad, like they don't use vars. Like it's a personal preference thing, but there's a lot of like, reasoning behind choosing any one of these things. But pretty much you can take a format that you like, put it in an ESLint file, or use the ESLint file that already exists. I believe one of the more popular ones is it LinkedIn, something like that. I think LinkedIn has a really popular ESLint file that a lot of people use. And what you do is you kind of run your code through it, and it can either tell you the errors that you have, and the errors would be like not actual errors. It'll tell you like, oh, you use tabs instead of spaces. Or B, you can actually get the ESLint file to fix your errors, or your warnings, as you would call them. And so you would write your code however you want, and then you would run it through an ESLinter, and it would then put your code in the same format that you want it. So especially in a team environment, this is very essential, because if you come into a team, you don't know exactly how they write code in that team. They'll just be like, well, listen, here's our ESLint file, here's the specifications, just look through the specifications, try to write your code like this. But the ESLint file will also help you out by telling you what you need to change, and it'll actually change A, B, and C for you. So it's definitely a good tool, especially in a larger team, especially if you like clean code, stuff like that. I think that these build tools are extremely important. These all tie into one category called build tools. And it's really important to learn it at this step. I think this is a great step to do it in, is right after maybe learning some of that CSS architecture, learning your package manager, stuff like that, and right before learning and picking a framework. So, and that will lead me to the next thing on the list, and that's create something. And this is something that we haven't really done too much, and this is create something maybe and with a suggestion of a library. What we really did was we created, like Matt said, we created a bunch of web apps like a Chrome extension, a Chrome app, stuff like that. And that really took all that we had learned up until that point to be able to create it, plus giving us the opportunity to go out there and learn even more than what we knew at that point. So I think this step is crucial as well, and it kind of happens multiple times throughout this whole roadmap, right? So if you notice back in step 5, go to search on GitHub and look at all those projects, maybe add to projects. And then even in step 1, where it says make 5 HTML layouts, a lot of this is like do. So you learn something, just do, like just make something with it. Because if you're not going to make something with it, you're gonna forget it. You're not going to retain it as well. You're not going to be able to like showcase your skills. You're not going to be able to fine tune your skills. I think creating something is the best way to learn it, at least for me, and everyone's a different kind of learner, but I definitely am a do it and then learn it kind of thing. And I definitely agree that you should get a good core concept of stuff, like maybe read a couple articles on Webpack, watch a video. I do a lot of YouTube video watching myself before I dive into something that I have no familiarity with. But as soon as I watch like 1 video, 2 videos, I'll go and start like making my own project with it. And then if I don't understand something, I'll go back to a video, I'll go back to the project. I'll go back to an article, and I'll learn how to do that thing that I don't understand, which to me is a little bit easier than going there and watching 15 videos and being like, well, what did I just learn? Like I don't know, like there's a million different things in there. Half those things I'm never going to use probably, but that's a personal preference thing. No one has to follow that, but that's how I kind of do it. I definitely agree with these steps where like create something, do something, make a website, make a web app. I think it's an important step, and it definitely should be done multiple times throughout the roadmap. Not like let's learn the whole roadmap and then create something. No, definitely not. Keep creating things as you learn. That's definitely an important aspect of this. So the next thing here on the list is number 14, which is pick a framework. And pick a framework seems very like solid, like you pick one framework and then never leave it and stuff like that. But realistically, that's never going to happen. I agree with one aspect of this, is that you should start with one of the frameworks. You shouldn't go like, I want to learn React, Vue, and Angular, which is the 3 frameworks that are listed here. I think it's important that you pick one off the bat, but that you might be using those skills that you're learning with this framework to transfer it to something else, to another framework at some point in the future. So it's important to learn not just like, the API of a framework and like the very general basic concepts. I think it's important to learn how a framework works, how it renders stuff, even on a rudimentary level. Like just understand how that JavaScript in the background is being generated is important to then transfer those skills to any different framework that you want. So if you go to an interview and you only know Vue.js, you could probably apply those skills to React, because it is obviously different syntax, but it has a very similar feel. There's a few different things that React does that Vue.js doesn't do and stuff like that. But in general, you should be able to spend a week with with React and bring it up to speed if you've already been familiar with something like Vue. The reason I mention Vue so much is because we've chosen Vue as our pick a framework. And we've definitely been using it quite often, and we've been using it for I think well over a month, maybe 2 months now, and like this last couple weeks have been very heavily in Vue for Matt and myself. So I think, and this brings it to the point where this is kind of where I'm at right now. So I'm kind of at step 14, step 15, I would say comfortably. Step 15 is practical time. So that's actually creating something in a modern framework. So that's what we're doing, right, with our Vue.js hat website, where like all the editing is going on through Vue.js, like interactive variables, the binding. So we're kind of like, we're using all all the skills and we're using our website to learn. And that's, again, another one of those like create something situations. And it's important to know where you're at. And this is kind of where I stick myself is I'm in section 15 right now. There is a few more to go. And it's not to say that I've never heard of the next sections, but I would say that I'm not well practiced in them. So to move on to them, let's go into something like testing your applications. That's section 16. So testing your applications has many different frameworks that you can use to test, many different uses. So I'll just list a few of them here. So Jest, Mocha, Protractor, Karma, Enzyme. So these, and I'm just going to read this little tidbit here because he explains a lot more better than I can. There are lots and lots of different tools for different purposes. I mostly find myself using the ones listed on the left, which is the ones that I just mentioned. However, you before you learn them, I would recommend you first understand the different test types. And then he gives you a link to the different test types in the article. So different test types would be like unit testing, user testing, stuff like that. I think testing is something that I definitely need to focus on. The reason that we haven't done an extensive amount on formal testing is because we're a team of 2 people. We don't have too many of those like larger web applications out there where it would require us to do an extensive amount of testing because thousands and thousands of people are using it. I have done extensive amounts of longevity testing before with the applications that we did for our client, and that's a totally different thing. But we didn't do any other testing other than the fact that we just sent it out to everyone on the team and made sure that they hammered at it. We didn't do any real formal testing, just a spreadsheet where people can log their issues and then just when the issue's solved and stuff like that. So this is something that I definitely need to get better at, and I definitely need to work at, and I definitely will be doing that in the next little while. I'll be working on testing. Maybe I'll look into one of these testing tools. It should be helpful in our development, especially with one of our clients with a larger user base. So that's 16. Let's move on to 17, which is progressive web apps. So I have very recently looked into progressive web apps. It's a very interesting concept. I really like them because what it allows you to do is allows you to use these things called service workers, which most of the modern websites now, modern web browsers now support, and it allows you to do things like have an offline mode for your application. And this almost gives you like an app-like functionality, like let's say on a cell phone. You can't expect a user to have internet access all the time, even though we are getting to that point where the world is getting more and more connected. But there are times when you're driving and all of a sudden you have bad connection. What the progressive web apps allow you to do is cache calls that your application would make in a thing called a service worker. So what it would do is let's say you need to call your server for all the content on your page. What it would do is when you're online, it would do the normal call regularly, but it would use a service worker and it would cache that call in the background. So it would cache that same, so the service worker would almost act as a pseudo server that you're calling. So it would put the call into the service worker, and when it detects offline mode, and you have to enable this through code, it would then call the service worker instead and get that cached response. So yes, you're not going to get the latest response from the server, but you are going to get something, and you are going to get that limited functionality even when you're offline because of that caching. I think this is a great way to handle stuff like this. I love the fact that this is going on because I'm a big proponent of write one code base and use it everywhere if it's reasonable. Obviously, on a performance intensive application, I'm not saying to do that. I'm saying you stick with native if you can for those kinds of things. But something like a small business application. For a small business like a restaurant with a menu and stuff like that, there's nothing wrong with you using a web app, the web app approach, because performance isn't really that important in that situation. A modern phone can handle opening a menu and listing through it. It doesn't need to have that, split second responsive time and stuff like that. So use at your discretion, but I'm a very big proponent when you can to save that money, save that time, and use one code base for all your applications. And this progressive web apps kind of give us that opportunity because it allows us to write almost native applications with a lot of the functionality. I believe they support like notifications natively on mobile devices. I believe they support. I'm not sure if they support storage APIs yet, but they might. I'm sure they support camera because even websites support camera. So stuff like that. It does support some native functionality, which is cool, without having to actually write native code. Really cool. Definitely something I'll be looking into in the future. So the next thing here, number 18, is static type checkers. So a lot of people, and I've had this discussion recently, will bash JavaScript because it's not statically typed, which is in reference to the fact that you can't put like int variable, right? Int a is equal to 1. So you can't use integers, you can't use doubles, you can't use strings, stuff like that. It's not statically typed. So what you're doing is you're putting a var, and then your variable can become anything. And then a variable plus another variable can become something else. And there's no real, there's no compiling, so you don't know what's going on. So someone could, add a string to a number, and then all of a sudden you have a string, and there's nothing in the compiler that'll tell you that you're doing it wrong. With thousands and thousands of lines of code, you can see where this can become a problem. And especially if you have a larger team, like how are you going to manage all this if someone's going to always do var, like always add two strings together, and then all of a sudden they see a number, they're going to add that number together, and then it's going to ruin your code, and it's going to be hard to find. So there's solutions to this, and I haven't looked into this thoroughly, so I just want to say that again. Like I said, I'm a couple steps behind. That's how I view myself. But I have looked into this a little bit, and I will be probably looking into this in the future, especially if I'm going to be writing code in a larger team. I feel like it's kind of important to stick to something like a traditional way of coding. And TypeScript is one of those technologies. There's another technology called Flow. I've actually never heard of Flow, but TypeScript I've definitely heard of. I know Node.js uses TypeScript. You can add Node.js TypeScript. I believe Vue has a TypeScript plugin. A lot of the larger frameworks and a lot of larger frameworks can utilize TypeScript. And what it allows you to do is have like almost like a pseudo compiler, a little bit of a compiler in there, and allow you to type your variables. So you can actually put an int a is equal to 1, or a string name is equal to, in quotes, an actual string in there. And if you don't do the right typing, and you don't do the right addition, concatenation, or addition or division, if the math doesn't work out, it's not just going to do it and then ruin your code. What it's going to do is it's going to tell you. That's as far as I understand it. Let me know if I've messed it up or anything like that. I would love to learn about it, and I'm definitely going to be looking into it. And then there's just two more things, and I don't know if it's labeled incorrectly. Numbered incorrectly, I'm not sure, but it's again 17, 18. Maybe it's just referring to the fact that you could learn these instead of these, or learn these alongside these, and they're the same. But one of them is server-side rendering, and it kind of, you can use it with any framework that you decide. So Vue.js, for instance, has Nux.js to allow server-side rendering. It's like a separate library on top of it. What server-side rendering is it renders the page or a part of the page on the server, and then serves that to you to then do any of your front end content modification with. So I ran into an issue with this recently, actually. When you're sharing to Facebook, it actually does not run JavaScript on your page when you do a share API without actually passing the variables in implicitly. What it does is it will, take your server-side rendered side of the page and just serve that. So what I was having an issue with is when I was sharing a page, it was using old variables from the initial load of the page, not the variables that the actual Vue.js actually rendered. So how I could fix that in the future would be to use something like server-side rendering, so it would serve the page with already those variables in place, and then the rest of it I would do with the Vue.js code on top of that I would need to do. That is a very viable method, and it is important. Another thing that it provides is I think now Google is fully running JavaScript on your page. So when Google crawls your page, it is going and running it and then taking all your meta tags and stuff like that with the run JavaScript. I know before it wasn't doing that, and people were saying even when it started doing that, it wasn't very effective. I think now it's really caught up to the point where you don't have to worry about having to depreciate your page too much. So Google will actually render it. But other search browsers might not. Like Bing, I'm not sure if it does JavaScript on the page. It's something that you can look up. But what this provides is that any page will be able to render your content pretty much. It'll be able to view your meta tags, view your content, view your tags, your divs and stuff like that, because you're serving it right to the browser. You're not modifying it in the browser in any way, and that's the main difference. So the server-side rendered stuff is rendering it on the server, serving it to the browser. Non-server-side rendered is just like giving you a very basic structure HTML that you put, and then doing all the rendering on the actual browser side. Positive and negatives of each for sure. Use them when you can. Again, this is not something that I've done very extensively, so I don't have too much of a suggestion on when to use it and stuff like that. And then the last thing here is all the things that were mentioned above. And that makes sense, like Canvas, any of the HTML5 APIs, SVG. SVG is kind of cool. I was looking into it recently. You can kind of do like actual drawing, like dynamic drawing on your applications. Source maps, functional programming, TC39, don't even know what that is. So there's many. What this is referring to is that there's so much more that even this comprehensive document doesn't cover. And I wouldn't let it overwhelm you, because there obviously is this much information and this much like technology out there. I think the most important thing that you can take from this document is the fact that yes, there are a lot of things that you need to learn if you want to become, a very, very talented, very highly sought after web developer. But what it also tells you is that the things that you're learning at the start, at the very beginning, are very useful, and use those things to build upon and make those, like, do those projects, have that practical time, make projects, use the skills that you learn as you're learning. Don't just learn and then do while you're learning. That's for sure a very big point that I got out of this front-end developer front-end roadmap, and I think you should too. Everything else is kind of, take it with a grain of salt. Know that you can learn it in a different order and it'll still be fine. That's not an issue. Like if you look at it right now and be like, oh man, I learned preprocessors way before I learned any sort of NPM packaging. Don't panic. Like that, there's nothing to panic, or there's no reason to panic or be concerned with how you learned it, because you learned it and it's your path, it's your journey. This is more for like a brand new developer if they really want to have some sort of structure for them. It's not a bad way to go about it. I kind of recommend looking at this, getting familiar with some of the words, some of the frameworks, some of the understanding of what everything is, and then kind of make your own path as you go. But I think that's all I'm going to say about this about the front-end developer roadmap, and I'm going to just pass it off to Matt if he has any comments, or if he wants to move on to the next segment, we can do that too.
Well, I think you covered that really extensively, and I kind of have a question, actually. And so we use the term library and framework kind of interchangeably when we talk to each other, and we know what we're talking about. So point 13 here, where it says create something, maybe a library, and this goes back to... I'm actually just going to read the blurb, actually, to clarify. So it says, you can call yourself a 75% modern JavaScript developer now. Go ahead and create something with all that you have learned. Maybe create some sort of library in which you have to use Sass and JavaScript, then use Webpack to convert Sass to CSS, and use Babel to transpile ES6 code. Once you are done with, release on GitHub and NPM. So what my question is do we know what the cutoff or what specifically the difference between a framework versus a library is? Because, for example, a CSS framework would be the Bootstrap, Materializer, Bulma, as mentioned before. What exactly would a library be in this case? So, as I would understand it, it would be like a UI kit for Bootstrap or something. I don't know whether that makes sense. I'm kind of just thinking out loud, really.
Yeah, so I'll try to explain it, and I don't know the definite answer for this, but I think I understand it to a certain degree. So a library is more of a one functionality thing. So like something like a slider would be a library. Something like adding like an infinite scroll to your page. That's a library. So you're adding a functionality to your page. Whereas a framework is creating something completely from like, pretty much using multiple different like things inside of it, multiple different code like work inside of it, and combining that all and creating something large. So creating a whole page, for instance, like Vue.js will create a whole page for you, right? Whereas something like Lightbox will create just a Lightbox. So that's a library. Vue.js is a framework.
Okay. Strangely, it's called a library, in my opinion, because with a library, you think like, oh, it has multiple books in it. So therefore, I would always think like there'd be more stuff in it. But the library in this case is actually the lesser large section, like the smaller section. Yeah. That's weird. That's weird to wrap your hand around. All right. I just wanted to know what, because we just talk and we know what we're talking about, right? Like I'll be like, oh, this library framework, whatever Vue, like right, because we're just trying to get through whatever meeting we're in or whatever, and people know what we're talking about, especially between ourselves. But just something for the listener.
Sure.
I think you can move on to the old segment number 2. Then I think like this concludes the roadmap discussion, which is quite extensive.
Yeah, we definitely covered that more extensively than I even thought we would. But yeah, that's good. I think it'll be beneficial. So yeah, I'll move on to the next segment. Segment number 2, update on HTML other things. So in last week's episode, we talked about kind of where we're at, what we need to do to finish the site up. And this week we kind of, did everything we needed to do to finish the site up. Now, barring a couple of little things we're still going to do after this call even, or after this podcast. But pretty much this week I was working on authentication for admins. So you're able to, go into a login page, log in to the site as an admin, and then with that, it gives you the admin panel, and you're able to edit, delete, and add content. So not a regular user will not be able to do that. It's all behind actual Node.js authentication, including a Vuex store to store that authentication. So that was a cool experience. I really enjoyed actually adding that. That had not too much problems. There was really good information online on how to. So that's one thing. The next thing I did, and this was actually while I was away on my trip in the hotel, I added pagination to our content. So if you have more than 9 things on the page, don't show those the rest of it, and it's server-side pagination, so that I can just keep calling the server for the extra things. And what we did was we used infinite scroll, and people can let us know if they don't like infinite scroll or if they think the other ways of pagination work better. I think just because I've been using Reddit a lot, I've been using Instagram a lot, Facebook a lot, they just use infinite scroll, and it seems to just be very easy to use, and I'm hoping that'll transfer over UI wise to everyone else. So, but we could definitely change it if there's an outcry of people hating it. I have no problem with that. But yeah, so pretty much I had to install an infinite scroll library, and then I just used, I created pagination code on the server side, on the front end side, and I implemented that with the infinite scroll, and it's worked out pretty well. Obviously, there was a few issues while I was doing it, but everything kind of worked out in the end. It works pretty fast now, actually. I've actually intentionally slowed it down a little bit for it not to be as jarring. Because before it would actually load even faster than I thought, and it would be almost like the page was loaded beforehand. I don't know, maybe that is the better way to do it. I'm not sure, but I slowed it down for now. Next thing I did was a major code refactoring. There was actually a lot of components. There was a lot of code in there that I could externalize into a component. So that's what I did with a couple of things. So I just, took a bunch of the HTML, JS, and CSS code, made a separate component, and just imported the component just to kind of make it a little more neat inside. And if we ever need to reuse those things, we can reuse them. It just kind of compartmentalizes the code a little bit better. I think our hub component was just getting a little bit out of hand, so I decided to kind of take care of that before it got even more out of hand. And then I got rid of a lot of redundant variable settings. So I was setting variables on like the created object, which means like pretty much on load. I was setting variables on switching of the routes and stuff like that. I was setting variables redundantly a lot because when I was writing quickly and I just wanted to get it to work. And what I did was I went back, made sure that none of the variables were redundantly being set millions of times. There's no point. And I kind of cleaned it up that way. There's still some more to clean up. I know of some that I'm going to look into in the future. But for now, I think it's in a decent state to be production ready. Then the next thing I did was I deployed those changes as well as server authentication and database authentication, like database admins and users, to DigitalOcean, the DigitalOcean Docker setup. And that was a whole thing. Like I am firmly seated in the fact that I will not be a DevOps person. Like I will not go into that field probably ever in my career. I don't like it. I don't get any kind of satisfaction out of it. But what I kind of did was literally just like shoot in the dark. Like, is this gonna work? No. Is this gonna work? No. Is this gonna work? Okay, it worked. That's fine. I would love to have someone that knows this stuff like the back of their hand take a look at my like Nginx configuration file. Take a look at my Docker files and see if I'm like very glaringly doing something wrong where like someone will be able to like hack the site in seconds. I don't think I am, but again, I am very much not into this kind of stuff, and I don't plan on getting too far deep into it. So for now, it's kind of just there and working. It's working how I want it to work, and the authentication seems to be working just fine, so I'm not too concerned. But again, if anyone wants to kind of lend a hand on this, I have no problem letting them take a look at the code and telling me what I did wrong, because I'm sure I did many things wrong, especially on the DevOps side. But yeah, other than that, that's about it. We're in the stages of doing the data entry soon. I still need to do a little bit of tweaking on the actually editing content. But other than that, I think I'm done. Like I'm very, very close to being done first stage deployment. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, so I did like a variety of UI changes over the last few weeks here and there, tweaking stuff, UX stuff, getting like properly formatted photos and pictures and stuff ready, and then I think it was yesterday we started looking at, and this always happens, oversights of stuff. So for example, we have a dynamic, for some reason, RSS feed link for each of the podcasts right now. But then it's like, well, the RSS doesn't change. So why did we make it user editable? And then why is it like not autofill? It just kind of like we have to get it every single time, copy paste. So like little things like that. Other things included, like I keep track of the links to the various episodes of the podcast, and I was keeping track of the full link, a shortened link, as well as a YouTube link. But we didn't consider that, with the availability bar, which is the thing where it says also available on, people can click through. We never considered the various services like TuneIn or Stitcher or whatever. Some of them have individual pages for each of the episodes. It's not just like the RSS feed. So first of all, it's like we have these editable fields because we half assumed that, we need dynamic things for each episode. But then we foolishly thought, it's on a third-party service. There won't be individual pages. So, you always catch like kind of broken logic like that when you're going through. So we kind of refactored some stuff and like are thinking about changing some stuff in, a future version. Because some of it's not necessarily broken. It's just not fully UX'd out, if you will. And then right now, I suppose we're in the final steps. We were working on data entry and that type of thing. And we have started specifically discussing the future plans. So a lot of my work came out of like before, and then you kind of went ham into putting together all the server stuff and making sure it all worked with the UI that I had created. So at this stage, it's like, okay, now that the server's all together and that type of thing, and it's getting very close to being done, version 1. Now we're talking about like, version 1.1, for example. So right now it's very kind of stripped down. There's not many transitions. Actually, I don't think there are transitions. There's not many hover effects. There's not many, very like flashy things or like little nice intricacies. And that's sort of something we'll be putting up when I come back from vacation. And it's just one of those things where we have to kind of go through the fine-tooth comb, fix up those little UX problems, like I said, with the editable fields, and then we need to clean all that up. And then we're also making we need to make procedures as well for link gathering. So it's like when I make an episode, what services I need to grab the links for, and where do I store them, and then I have to make sure that there's a repost. There's a repost policy. So for example, we put like our Podbean is our podcast host. I put it up there. I put the show notes there, but we're also going to have redundant show notes on the actual site. So what's the procedure there? So it's a lot. What I'm doing right now, since my UI stuff is mostly done, is a lot of procedural stuff, a lot of looking at the future and being like, oh, a box shadow would be nice here, a hover effect would be nice here, and that type of thing. And that'll come in a few weeks, and I think we'll be tweaking quite a bit as we move forward as well. And then also to bring the capitalist side into it, of course, we're looking at monetizing the site as well. So things like, looking to see where we can add banners. Cause I don't want to bombard people and have things pop up where it's like, sign up for a newsletter here and that type of thing, at this point. And, in general, I don't want to do that. So right now we're looking at, unintrusive, little banners and that type of thing, just to sort of get a little bit of revenue flowing, for the site. And we're looking at like that type of thing. And then we're looking at, basically expanding our social media horizon as well, which is not really necessarily an update on the site itself, but the social media drives traffic to the site and vice versa. So it's just, everything's kind of coming together now. And as a final note, we are now planning content. So content is being planned as well at this point. And basically I think we'd said this in the show before, but it's like all the time that we're putting toward the actual website right now will then be used as content creation time. And so what I'm looking at is I read a couple of articles saying one of the things you should do if you want to start writing on, Medium or just like writing professionally to an extent is to write every day, whether you publish or not. So I'm kind of looking at that. So for content planning, because I'll kind of be the king of content for a while, I think, as Mike does a lot of like the service work. So one thing I'm looking at is potentially trying to make sure that I write like frequently. Like when I come back, I want to write every day if I can, not necessarily publish it, and might not even be stuff for HTML, all the things, because I do write stuff about gaming and other stuff that happens, that I like, my other hobbies or whatever, right? Just kind of write in general. So I kind of want to get into that so that I can more easily generate content, write better show notes, or more to the point show notes, because they are just supposed to be show notes. You're supposed to be listening to the show, and write like better guides, write better social media posts. So I think writing is kind of on my ticket in terms of content. So everything's kind of coming together. If you haven't noticed, we've like been talking about everything now. It's like the site's up. We're talking about content. We're talking about procedures we have to make. We're talking about everything. Everything is starting to really come together. The podcast is obviously off on a good foot, a really great foot, actually. Getting some good feedback on that and getting good download numbers and, just looking to grow at this point. So yeah, really, the podcast has been our rock the whole time. As we've said, it's something steady we want to do each week. And now everything is coming together. And now we need to get the procedures in place so that the content comes together. And I think that kind of sums up where we're at the moment. I think at this point, I kind of want to move on to web news because we are already at an hour and 12 in. So, or like around there anyway. As is tradition, yeah. Every single time Mike and I go like, man, I don't know about this. Like, I don't know whether we're going to have enough to talk about. And then we go and look and we go, oh, well, it's hour 30 in or whatever. That's good. So anyway, so web news. So this was suggested via an Instagram DM. And basically it's basically Microsoft Office versus Google Docs, or the Google Office Suite, whatever you'd like to call it. So as usual, I got some rough notes here. I'm going to read those and then we'll have a discussion. So Microsoft Office has a premium paid for desktop experience in the form of the Office Suite, right? So basically it's the main programs in there, as everyone knows, is Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. And what some people don't actually know is that they also do have a free online version called Office Online, and it's a counterpart that works at a basic level for editing. It also works for viewing documents online. It also works for if you're in OneDrive, let's say, so it plugs into OneDrive. Basically if you're on OneDrive online on the actual web app, if you will, you'll click on, let's say a Word doc, and it'll essentially pop up in a viewer, which is essentially Word Online. And of course, because it's Microsoft Office and Microsoft runs OneDrive, they all work together, right? There's a desktop app, there's a web app, there's a mobile app for OneDrive, and they all plug into each other. And you can also there's some collaboration tools where multiple people can edit documents, and it's extensive, right? It's Microsoft Office, it's the Office suite, it's there for business, it's been around for years, it's big. And now we have sort of the new kid on the block, if you will, and that's sort of the Google Office suite, or whatever you want to call it. And so it's a similar offering. However, there is, as far as I know, no paid component to the sort of the main app. So Google Docs, which is essentially the Word equivalent, Google Sheets, which is the Excel equivalent, and Slides, which is the PowerPoint equivalent. And those are the main programs within this Google suite, like I said, Docs, Sheets, and Slides. And it integrates with Google Drive, so that's, again, like OneDrive, but this is the Google Drive, of course, and they have collaboration features. So there's that. They also have desktop, quote-unquote, apps, if you will. So if you're using Chrome, you can use it. I don't know whether it's considered a progressive web app, but there's a way to use them offline if you're using Chrome on a desktop. There's also the Chromebook apps, and as well as the smartphone apps for Docs, Sheets, and Slides. So it's an interesting comparison. It's like, is there a need for both? Is one better than the other? There's pros and cons, but there are several similarities. So I'm going to kind of let Mike dive in, because I know I'm going to have a conflicting point with him on this.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm more of a Google guy, and our business is all Microsoft. So we have the Office 365 suite, as we've mentioned, and stuff like that. I would say I'm okay with it. It was mostly Matt's call, since he was the one that was setting it up. So like, obviously it's on him to do that. And I'm okay with it at this point. We've been using it. It's mostly been fine. But the things I like about Google Drive and Google Docs and all those, the suite of apps is, A, it's free. It's accessible on any computer. No matter how weak your computer is, whatever. As long as you have an internet connection, you can kind of load it up at least once, and then you're good to go offline even with it. The thing that beats Office by a large margin is the collaboration tools. The fact that it's free gives it very, very easy, like, oh, I'm working with a client, let's send him this link to the document. We both are working on the same document. It's live. You're working on it live. You don't have any issues. You can, edit, even talk in the document. You can chat in the document. The formatting for me, like, I'm not a huge format person. I like all the formatting in Google Drive, in the Google Docs. So I use it as my sole writing application. I used to use Word. The last time I formatted my computer, I didn't even install Office 365, even though I have a copy. I don't know why. I could still do it, because it's kind of still a pain. If I receive a docx file, I have to kind of like open it in Google Docs. It takes a couple extra steps. But I just haven't had too much of a need. Like, I receive a docx file once a month, maybe, and I have to go through a couple steps. Not a big deal for me. Mostly it's collaboration. Like, throughout university, excuse me. Throughout university, I worked on a lot of group projects, like a lot of group projects. If you're ever in school, you know what I'm talking about. And without Google Docs, it would have been a nightmare. Like, I think we tried Word Online once, and it was like a 5-10 minute delay for some reason. Like, we had no idea. Like, I would start typing, and all of a sudden 5 minutes later, my text would be janked, and half the page would be like up, like a kilometer up, and stuff like that. Like, I don't know what they didn't do right. It could be changed at this point, but I'm kind of like almost scared of using it because of just the time waste that happened when I did. Also, OneDrive we've had issues with OneDrive pretty consistently. It's good now. Not that, like, honestly, now we use it for its generated purpose, but when we were using it as an actual development drive, and we had a lot of files constantly syncing, there was constantly like syncing issues, and all of a sudden your OneDrive just stopped syncing in general, and you had to like exit it, go into it again. Anyway, now that we're using it for what its intended purpose, as kind of like a cold storage, it's working fine, and I have no issues with it for that purpose. But as a working drive, I would definitely not recommend it at this point. Yeah, like I'm on the Google side, so I'd like to hear what you have to say to combat me. Although I know like half of the arguments at least.
Well, yeah, because like I mean, I set up our infrastructure for the company, so like the email and the website and getting everything registered and getting the DNS all set up and all that infrastructure back end stuff. And so I opted for the Office 365 or whatever you want to call it for business, right? So we have like OneDrive and I have Office 365 personal as well. So like that's an attestament to how much I'm a fan of Office and that type of thing. I will say that in terms of we've tried, like you tried the collaboration tools with some classmates. I've tried the collaboration tools. Excuse me. We have tried the collaboration tools within the company, and we had similar problems where text was kind of disappearing, things weren't syncing. I think we lost connection a couple of times. Again, one experience. And years ago. So one experience and years ago. So your mileage may vary. Could have been bad internet. Could have been us doing something stupid. Who knows? But we never really went back. The Google solution is more plug and play from my experience. However, I will say that I do enjoy having a premium desktop app, like potential, like having it there as something that I can fall back on. I like that it complements a free version. So if for some reason I didn't pay my subscription fee for Office 365 that month and I lose access to Word, I can still absolutely view and edit my documents to some extent. So I like having that. I like having the option for both. I like that because we're using OneDrive, that it all works together. There's like, so for example, I'll just give a straight up example. You can simply sync to several different OneDrives from Word as an example. Now, with that example, there's quite a bit of issues saving, and I don't know again whether that's us or what. I don't really seem to experience it on the personal side too much. But Word, as of recently, and I don't know whether I'm on the latest version, but it has like if you save to like a OneDrive, it'll like constantly autosave. But for some reason, whenever I try to go and save, it takes like 20 seconds or something because it keeps pulling up this window where it's like trying to communicate with your drive. And so it's trying to like figure out like what's going on. And there's something there. Like Mike and I for the longest time too, and this is gone as far as I know, before this whole update where it used to autosave. So maybe half a year ago or so, we used to always try to we'd go into Word, we'd type up a document, we'd try to save to our OneDrive, and we would try to save it locally. So we'd literally like go to the hard drive and then just select where OneDrive was and try to just save the file. And what it would do is it would realize, oh, it's OneDrive, and it would try to do this like interconnected thing where Word was like directly connecting to OneDrive. It wasn't just saving on the hard drive and then OneDrive handles it. It's like trying to intercept it or trying to like be that connection. And it would go through this upload center, and upload center failed like 98% of the time. I don't know what we were doing wrong. I don't know whether it was us. I don't know what was going on. But as far as I know, that is now gone. I haven't seen that icon for a long time. And this version seems to work. And I do like that once it's auto saved, like once it's saved once it's authenticated, it seems to be totally fine. It seems to be absolutely, like, it saves automatically. I have like absolute confidence in it. I'm not afraid of it. I'll continue working from my on a document from my computer to my phone and to my Windows tablet and stuff. So like I have absolute confidence. So I think this is where my pros come in, and this is why I really like it. Is first of all, I like Outlook and that type of thing. And I know that wasn't listed in the main programs of the Google ecosystem, but it's absolutely like a part of the ecosystem. It's this ecosystem argument again. I think it comes back to the conversation we had with a few episodes ago, where I kind of like being in one ecosystem, and I like having everything all on one, and I like having the confidence that everything's going to be together, and I like having everything for I want to say formal, but that's like everything in uniform, I think is the best way to say it. And so like I don't even use Outlook, the app. I don't even use Outlook on the computer, Outlook desktop or whatever they call it these days. I just use the web app. But I like having everything together, and I for some reason, how Microsoft has set things up makes more sense to me. I understand it's very similar, but like even when it comes to servers, I always like found myself gravitating toward Microsoft in terms of when I was doing server administration. Like I can absolutely administer Linux, that's fine, but like I found myself going there. So I don't know whether it's like, full disclosure, I don't know whether it's like me being a fanboy, if you will, or what it is, because like I said, I just listed off a bunch of the problems we were having, but it just seems to me like it's when Microsoft works, and we've said this with Mike, and we've recently moved to Microsoft Teams. I know that's outside of the realm of this Microsoft Office apps thing, but like Mike and I recently moved to Microsoft Teams, and honestly, it is so much better. It is so much better than what we were using before. So we were using Google Hangouts, which admittedly is sort of a dead app to an extent, and it is so much better now that we're using Teams. It connects to everything we're using. It's right there. And again, it's that ecosystem. It has a grip on me. And I don't know whether it's I'm fiercely brand loyal as well, as a full disclosure. So whether it's part of that with me where I'm like, oh, I like this app and it works really fine. But now, for example, like now that whole upload center scenario is gone and I have this like auto saving Word, like I really like that. It works really well. There were some weird lag problems a couple of versions ago I had with Word as well, and those are gone. So like when Microsoft works, and it often does, it works like usually like really, really well. And there's always problems, of course, as with everything and anything. But like I don't know what it is. Like it's like Google to me, and this isn't an insult on Google, but Google Docs and Sheets and whatever. Like I mostly have experience with Google Docs specifically, so I'm taking my other comments on other stuff with a grain of salt. But I find Google Docs to be like Office Online, a non-premium version. And I'm not trying to like say that as an insult, because I use Google Docs to compile the show. I use Google Docs quickly to put things together. I'm on another podcast and we use Google Docs. I'm absolutely fine with using it. But I find it to be a slimmed down experience, whereas I find Word to be a really full experience, even though I don't use the advanced features of Word. I don't know whether that's a premium complex or what. I don't know what that would be considered.
Yeah.
I don't know
what. It's definitely weird. It's
weird. Like I think this web news is just so that it brings out my weirdness with like a lot of stuff. But like it's. I mean, you even said it, Mike. Our email works fantastically. Like there's no problems with our email. I don't recall something going down. Or it ever going down. I really like how I can easily attach things from my OneDrive into my email. I really like how easily Microsoft plugs into everything. Like it plugs into any email app I've tried, and it plugs in like flawlessly. The contacts make a bunch of sense. Like all my contacts are stored on Microsoft services, or on the Microsoft service, whether it be personal or business. All my contacts are stored there, and I just sync it to all my devices. And it works really, really well. Email works fantastically. Push, like I've never missed a notification. So I think maybe what it is, and I know this escapes the Office a bit, but in terms of Microsoft, I just had a really good experience at one point, and I can't even really name what that would be, but I had a really good experience at one point, and I just became brand loyal maybe. But it's not, but like I can be torn from a brand. Not quite easily, but I can be torn from a brand. It's not impossible to tear me from a brand, but like the upload center and the weird lag problems and again the collaborating that we tried years ago and only once that we had trouble with, those are 3 things out of like 100 things that I use that are all together. Whereas with Google, maybe it's because I didn't start with Google, maybe it's because Google came out later, and so I was like, well, I don't want this. Or even still, docx, for example, as a format is more standard. And I remember in college them being like, you have to have Word because we're going to send you docx files. And that was absolutely true. People would try to use OpenOffice or whatever to get around the fact that they didn't want to purchase Office. And this was before we knew they were giving us a free version as a part of our like tuition or whatever. But in the beginning, in the very first semester, people were like, oh man, I can't open docx. I can open docx, but like I'm not getting the full docx experience. I'm getting this really weird, like I'm getting these weird messed up titles, like it's not rendering properly because you're opening it in a program that's just trying to be compatible. It's not actually Word. And so you're getting a better experience, and that actually may have been the turning point for me. Whereas when I installed like Word, I think it was 2007 at the time, Word 2007, I was like, oh man, this is such a better experience. And I think I've just been loyal ever since then.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I would say that you're loyal maybe I don't know if it's to a fault, to be honest, because I've seen people loyal to the point where they won't use any other product, which is crazy. At least you're willing to use other products. But I mean, the one thing I'll say, the advantage of you being Microsoft and us not going full Google is at least I get to experience other stuff. And I like to experience other technologies. Like you said with Teams, that was a pleasant surprise with the fact that how well it works. It's a little bit frustrating that like we were using Skype beforehand for our video calls and our screen sharing. And like the difference between Teams and Skype is like night and day. It's like they're using two different completely technologies. Teams is just so much crisper. The screen sharing never fails, and it never like goes to a worse quality. Like Matt and I live, I don't know, 30, 40 kilometers away from each other, and we would have serious issues screen sharing where like I could see like maybe 13 pixels on his screen and vice versa. With Teams, that's never happened. So we know it's not a connection issue. It's something to do with Skype. So I'm happy that I got to experience that, because if it wasn't for our, like the Office 365 subscription, we wouldn't have had that. And I don't mind using both ecosystems because it separates me, like my work and my personal life is now separated not just by like different accounts, it's separated by ecosystems, which makes it a little bit easier to separate. Now I do use some Microsoft stuff on my phone. Like I use the email in the Gmail client because Microsoft works in Gmail, no problem. And stuff like that. But other than that, I try to like, keep my work and social life a little bit separate, at least have some sort of line. And this helps in that way. So I don't mind it. But like to me, all those positives that you were mentioning, like, Microsoft has amazing email. Microsoft has amazing this, like other than Teams, I would say, because I don't think, although we haven't used Hangouts for Business, which is a new application inside of Google, so I don't know how good that is. That could be just as good. It could be like really bad. Knowing Google, it's probably not that great. Well, it's true. Like their messaging is not great. Like it's just not great. So I'm assuming Hangouts for Business is not as great. I would like to try it at some point, but who knows? But other than that, I would say that Google will do everything just as good. Like their email is also never going down. Like their for me, like you said, I don't use those advanced features. Like I don't use any of the advanced features in Excel. I don't use any of the advanced features in Microsoft Word that I couldn't use in Docs. All the features that I use are in Docs, just like in Word. It now opens docx files no problem. Like, I mean, you said 2007, right? So yeah, I agree with you there. It wasn't that great at opening, or even like, I don't think it even could open them. I think OpenOffice was the only one, and like you said, it was janked. I don't know. Like I'm very much adaptable to new technology, so I go where the technology is best at the time, and I'm okay with it dying the next year and then going to a new thing in a year. Like I don't mind as long as I'm using the best at that current time. I think that's where me and you differ the most. Is like I have nothing like really terrible to say about Microsoft because I use it for a lot of different things, and I don't mind using it. But I really I can see the benefits of Google, and if we had to switch tomorrow to Google, I would have no qualms about that. Like I wouldn't say anything like that's fine. If let's say hypothetically Yahoo all of a sudden becomes this massive company and puts out their own suite and it has A, B, and C better than Google, I'd be like, let's go to Yahoo. You know what I mean? Like that'd be fine by me, because if they're the best at that time, why don't and they're free. Or like even if you have to pay the same amount that we're paying for Office 365, I think that Google's is similar, if not. I think it's the same amount that you would have to pay for using Google's suite for business. So it just makes sense to me to use whatever one is available. I don't mind using Microsoft's though, so that's where I'm gonna leave it.
I would say we should conclude, I think, with a very brief conversation on whether Google Docs, because it is free and because it is so comparable to Microsoft Office, and I think this ties in really close with the DM that I received, is because Google Docs and the Google Office suite, or whatever they want to call it, is free and very comparable, do you think that Microsoft Office / Microsoft Office Suite is obsolete, or what place does it have in the market specifically as a premium product? Let's assume, because like you can pay, so let's assume you're getting the full Google experience and you're getting the full Microsoft experience. So in order to get that Microsoft one, you have to pay for it.
In my opinion, it absolutely has a place, because a lot of people are more familiar with it, and I don't think that it's a good thing for only one company to rule that landscape. Like, if Google, let's say if Microsoft was like, let's screw it, we're leaving Office 365 and leaving Microsoft Word and all that because Google's beating us and all this, I think that would be detrimental to everyone, because Google would become stagnant. They wouldn't add anything to their suite because there's no competition. So I'm a huge proponent of competition in industry, and Microsoft's competition, I think, is strong. Like, I don't think that there's, again, too much variation between the two, to be honest. I think like any normal person could use one or the other and get everything done. So I don't see any problem with that. I think it's a good thing, and I think they keep releasing updates and they keep adding new features, making it faster, making it stronger. So I'm definitely for the fact that I think Microsoft definitely has a space in this industry, and I think they have an even larger space than Google in like the actual, Office applications and Office 365 stuff.
I would agree, because like there's a lot in, like, to be clear, like even in Teams, there's a whole marketplace of apps and plugins and that type of thing that we have never even touched, and we're impressed with Teams as it is. Mm-hmm. And so I think really what it comes down to is how you use the product. Like if you're looking just to do a really quick collab, I think that Google Docs beats it. And I think like that's what we do for the show. I'm looking at a Google Doc right now. But if we're doing something where we need this document to automatically attach itself to a calendar invite and then have the meeting automatically appear, like something like, I don't know, making up a scenario, I would be more confident that Microsoft, whether it be via plugins or whatever, would be able to do that. And it would plug into our Teams, because there's a meetings section of Teams, and be like, we're in a meetings call right now. And that's all because of the Microsoft service. We're not in a call where you called me. We made a meeting where we said we're going to record the podcast at whatever time, and then we clicked on the meeting and pressed join. And I think that the premium price of having, let's say, like Word and that type of thing is going to come from people using advanced features. I've never used any Google Docs, for example, advanced features in comparison to like Word advanced features. I'm not even sure if there are any. But I know that there are more advanced features of Word in which people are probably using it in very innovative ways, where they have a workflow that requires like it to connect to this SharePoint or export this certain way, or they have templates that are, custom templates that they've uploaded into Word, or they've made in Word with coloring with their company and that type of thing. And I assume, as far as my exposure to them both, Docs and Word, I assume the Word is better at that. I also think there's a reason why I don't see people making Google Sheets outside of very basic ones, or ones that a lot of the time, if somebody needs to have the public contribute, they use a Google Sheet. I don't see people doing their finances in Google Sheets. I personally have never seen it. I'm sure people absolutely do it. I'm not saying it can't do that. I'm not saying that at all. But in my experience, especially if it's like a large company, I would see them doing that in Excel, and then, putting it into whatever accounting software they have on top of that. So I don't know. I'd say my verdict is yes, I agree with you that there is a place for Microsoft Office. Absolutely agree with you there. It keeps them both on their toes. They're both fighting all the time. It's competition, right? I'm just looking now. Google Docs has a thing that says add-ons, do more with Docs. So, I mean, there's like add-ons there. There's in Teams, there's, a store, and like they're pushing each other forward, which is really good. And I would say at this point that, and this is a biased opinion probably, but I think that Microsoft is better for the more advanced stuff, and Google is better for the more consumer, quick, let's just bang out a quick collaboration here piece. And I think you could absolutely do both with both services. Like, you could do something complex on Google and you could do something easy with Microsoft. But I just think in terms of UX, that's my opinion on that. And so, yeah, I'd say they both have a place. And I think that the premium that you pay for Microsoft personally is worth it. And I'm fine with free with Google, obviously. So that's my conclusion. I don't know whether that's an actual conclusive point, but I think there's space for both, and there's pros and cons of each, and the UX is different for each, but that's good because it's competition in the market. So, because I don't think OpenOffice is holding a torch to Microsoft Word. I don't think OpenOffice is holding a torch to Docs. I'm not saying in terms of functionality or usability or anything like that. I'm not saying that at all. But I don't hear about people talk about OpenOffice. I don't hear people talk about it. I don't hear people talk about LibreOffice. I don't hear people talk about that. I hear people talk about Word, and I hear people talk about Docs. So I think those are the big boys in the space. With those other guys, doing well. Admittedly, they probably have millions of downloads at this point. But that's my 2 cents. I think we should probably wrap it up. We're at about an hour 40 here now, give or take. Unless you have anything else you'd want to discuss, Mike.
Nope, I'm good.
All right. Well, thank you for listening, and make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing on the platform of your choice. You can follow us on the socials via @HTML All the Things on Facebook and Instagram. We also have a Twitter @HTML Everything. You can check us out on Medium. You can check us out on GitHub. And hopefully you can check us out right now at htmlallthethings.com. Remember, we are on Patreon via patreon.com/htmlallthethings. Give that a go. Check out the tiers. Feel free to leave a comment or a review on the platform you're listening to this on. And we are signing off.